pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger roll with Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight downside SCE off. Say again, SCE off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
Hey, hello everybody. Can y'all hear us now, potentially? There we go. It looks like the audio is coming through now. Folks, we are working through the tech checks here, and we have finally gotten the go from the audio. I see a bunch of 5x5s in chat. Thanks for sticking with us for an extra minute there. Just getting the audio coming through. Let's try this intro one more time. My name is Thomas Burkhart, news director for National Spaceflight, and now I am able to introduce the rest of our team. Let's see who else we got on comms. First and foremost, Mr. Chris Gebhardt is the assistant managing editor of NASA Spaceflight, and he is joining us live from the press site at Launch Complex 39B. Well, all right, I guess it's not at 39B. It's at the Kennedy Space. He's looking at Pad 39B. Chris Gebhardt, how are you?
Oh, if I was sitting on Pad 39B, I would be far more happy than I am right now. And I'm very happy already. But oh my gosh, this is absolutely amazing. I am happy to be here to take all your questions on NSF Live. And how are you doing, Thomas?
I am doing well. Realizing that it is L-1 for Artemis 1 gets a lot of the team very happy right now. Very excited. Good to have you on for NSF Live today. Also joining us is the resident SLS expert himself, Mr. Philip Sloss. Philip, how are you doing today?
Well, we're a little late, but we're finally here.
Is that on brand? Is that just what we're going with at this point? Philip,
Something
thank you
like
for
that.
joining us. And like we said, well, all right, so I got to do the intro again. This is our last update before the official launch coverage from NASA Spaceflight begins for the launch of Artemis 1. We'll be taking all of your questions and giving you the latest on the countdown as it progresses towards tomorrow morning at 8:33 a.m. Eastern Time, when the launch window for Artemis 1 will open. So again, as usual on NASA Spaceflight, this is an interactive stream. Please tag us at NASA Spaceflight with your questions, and we are going to answer as many of those as we can over the next hour and a half or so. And we'll also be previewing our live launch coverage, which will begin later this evening, right before tanking begins and the rocket begins to be fueled for launch. Let's start with a brief status update as to where we are in the countdown right now. We are at just about L-17 hours or so. The T-minus clock is going to be slightly different than that. But Philip, what are the teams working on right now in the countdown? What are the processes they're working on or the systems they're looking at this stage before launch?
Well, I mean, at this stage, they were talking about that this morning. It looks like the weather is a little bit better today in terms of the way that the setup is with the flow coming from a different direction. But they were talking about pulling forward some of the pad clears to get ready for tanking the vehicle. And so even though we're still, maybe 12 hours away from doing that, there's a lot of steps ahead of that. So they should really be getting ready to clear the pad. It may take a few more hours to do that, but those are really the big steps. We're really into just the final steps of the pre-tanking countdown. So and as far as we've heard, everything seems to be going well.
Yeah, indeed. And I think right now, if they're like fully on the timeline, they would be undergoing ICPS or interim cryogenic propulsion stage power up for launch. So the ICPS was powered up a little bit earlier in the count just to do some avionics and systems checkouts ahead of time. And then once all of those passed, they powered it back down, and now they are powering it back up for launch.
Sounds good. And we were getting some questions about the countdown, and we're going to get through as many of these as we can. We'll talk about where they are now. Like we just said, core stage power up is the current focus of the teams. We will also talk about when we expect fueling to begin, and we'll talk about why we're going live when we are. And we'll talk about the business end of the countdown and what we're all going to be expecting when we spool up our launch coverage in a few hours from now. I do have one quick question from Khalid, who is asking, why is it L- and not T-? So let's touch on this to begin with. Chris Gebhardt, you are sitting at the press site looking at the T- countdown clock, which is going to differ slightly from the L- clock that we see on our overlay right now. Want to just walk us through the difference between the two and what the T- clock is at right now?
Yeah, so the T- clock is at 14 hours, 16 minutes, and 49 seconds and counting, whereas the L- clock is a little bit different, right? So the L- clock is the actual how far are we away from 8:33 and 0 seconds a.m. Eastern Daylight Time tomorrow, which is the anticipated liftoff of SLS at the opening of its 2-hour launch window. So that is giving us the literal that is the time until the opening of the launch window. But the T- clock is a little bit different because we have about 3 hours of built-in holds remaining in the countdown right now. So there is a 2.5-hour built-in hold at the that will begin at L- 9 hours 40 minutes. And that is the pre-tanking hold. So this is a 2.5-hour hold during which the launch team will perform their go for tanking meeting. They will go through and make sure the vehicle is actually ready for fueling and give that final go, no go poll. And then during that hold is when they will begin chill down of the liquid oxygen transfer lines from the liquid oxygen sphere to the mobile launcher, and as well as chilling down some of the main propulsion system lines in the SLS's core stage as well. The count then picks back up. Ooh, excuse me. The count then picks back up during the entire fueling process, and then the clock will hold again at T minus 10 minutes for a final 30-minute built-in hold. And at that point, the launch minus and the T minus times will align. So we'll be launch minus 10 minutes and T minus 10 minutes. But that's why there's a little bit of a difference here because of the 3-hour built-in holds that remain in the count.
Gotcha. And so at some point in the countdown, the two clocks will align with one another and they'll both be have it in the same time. And that's after the final built-in hold. The T minus and the L minus clock will actually be the same thing, right?
Exactly. And that alignment is what is known as terminal count. The final, you are counting down to 0, ideally lighting the engines. And if everything goes to plan, then those big boosters light and we are going somewhere, to paraphrase NASA.
Gotcha. And of course, we're getting a whole bunch of questions in the chat, so I'm going to run through these. Let's see what else we can talk about. So like we said, we touched on the countdown clock. We touched about where they are in the countdown right now. We've got a next question here from The Name's Dave, who says, how long do we need to wait to see the business end of loading propellant and the point where they really go for an attempt? So at what point from now are we going to expect fueling to really commence in earnest, Philip?
Let's see. I'm 3 hours behind you guys from a local time standpoint, so I need to make sure. But it would be right after midnight Eastern time. Is I think the plan if things go normally. So Chris was just talking about the countdown. So the countdown will hold at T minus 6 hours and 40 minutes, and that's that 2 hour and 30-minute hold. And pretty much right around the time the clock is held is when the mission management team will have their status and weather briefing and make sure that the weather is okay to begin tanking. And they could give, if things are going smoothly, they could give a go to begin tanking basically when the launch team wants to do that. So we'll just have to see. We'll have to see what that is, but the nominal timeline would be it was either 12:18 a.m. Eastern or 12:15. Let me pull that up. But
it's L minus 8 hours and 15 minutes, so that should be around the 18 mark. I think is what you were saying there, 12:18, and that's actually core. And to answer your question a little bit differently, Philip, that's an interesting question, Philip, isn't it? Because does the start of fueling, is that marked from liquid oxygen transfer line chill down, or when propellants actually start flowing into the core stage?
It would be the chill down of the propellant lines, and so liquid oxygen has the density of water essentially, and so it's dense enough that it requires pumps to pump it from the liquid oxygen sphere, which is it's on the northwest corner of the pad. So in this, we're looking at the rocket, it would be off to the left, and you can see a big sphere in this shot. That's one of the liquid hydrogen spheres. But the pumps they're actually right around the base of the liquid oxygen sphere. So they will be started to move the fluid from there through the cross country lines, and they'll do that slowly, so that those lines are basically at ambient temperature, which is probably 90 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that right now. You guys will have to tell me how hot it is, but it is August in Florida. But they will slowly push the liquid oxygen through all of the lines basically into the core stage, so they don't shock them, making that 300 degree temperature difference. You want to kind of gradually cool the equipment down so that you don't shock it. And so they will start slow, and they'll start slowly pumping it from the sphere up towards the core stage.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like in winter when you open the door and you get that really cold blast and your body sort of tenses. But like, imagine that at 300, imagine a 300-degree temperature difference. Like you want to slowly ease SLS into that.
Right. Well, like the thing that I've done a bazillion times is if you have you don't have any Keurig coffee makers, but if you make a pot of coffee with a glass carafe, if you take a hot carafe off and you run some cold water into it, you can crack the glass very easily because of the temperature difference. And you don't want to do that to
Yeah.
the lines either.
Exactly.
All right, thank you. Let's see what other questions we got. We also have a couple super chats and stuff coming in here. I do want to thank everyone for their support that is making this Artemis 1 coverage possible. So Peter and Emily, thank you both for becoming Red Team members. Really appreciate that. Hope you enjoy the perks. But other questions coming in here. We've got Brady asking, what are the weather requirements for today's launch? Can we talk a little bit about the weather commit criteria? Well, oh, wait, hold on. First off, sorry, I just noticed the camera. Mr. Jack Beyer with the cameo on camera right now. Guess we should give him a shout out. Standing just to the left of the countdown clock and waving at us. Hi, Jack. How you doing? Jack Beyer, of course, sporting the Mock Diamonds merch. Also, good choice there, Jack. But Chris, want to touch a little bit about weather commit criteria?
Yeah. So the good news overall is that at the beginning of our window, tomorrow morning, there is an 80% chance of acceptable weather. That decreases as you move into the back half of the window to about 60%, 60% favorable conditions. That a lot has to do with the weather setup and dynamic that we have tomorrow, which is a southeasterly flow coming in off of the Atlantic, but it's a relatively weak southeasterly flow. So what that usually means is that as all that energy builds over the warm Atlantic and then hits land, it tends to create thunderstorms and weather very quickly. But that will push in, and that will start to happen as we move into the back part of our window. So like from 9:33 to 10:33 is when that sort of sliding scale of percentages moves down toward the 60% go range. Primary concerns for tomorrow are basically lightning and flight through precipitation. Lightning both triggered based on the surface electric field mill rule and our triggered lightning rule for cumulus clouds. So basically there's two different types of lightning that we can have. There's the normal atmospheric setup for natural lightning, like you see in the great photos that Brady got yesterday of the thunderstorms behind SLS on the launch pad. That's natural lightning. That would be the surface electric field mill rule that's in place. But once SLS takes off, the motion of the rocket through the air actually lowers the overall potential energy in the atmosphere that's needed to trigger a lightning strike. So you can have triggered lightning where the rocket can actually cause the atmosphere to trigger a lightning strike. Which you do not want. So we have those concerns throughout the window, and we also have flight through precipitation, which is not allowed, and both of those are not allowed as a 45th Space Force range safety consideration. That is not necessarily the SLS program saying our rocket can't fly through precipitation. It is a safety measure imposed on all users of the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and the Kennedy Space Center by the 45th Space Wing, as are the lightning rules as well. If it is overcast tomorrow morning as well, that is not necessarily an impediment to the liftoff of SLS. There is a requirement that the range has and that NASA has for what's known as direct observation of the vehicle, direct visual observation of the vehicle. But that rule can be satisfied with ground and air-based camera assets. So if it is cloudy tomorrow morning, that's not necessarily oh no, there are clouds, SLS can't launch. Not the case anymore with that. So in terms of our weather, that is the pattern that we are sort of setting up for our first attempt on Monday morning, the 28th.
And there's that awesome photo Brady got last night when we were sitting around waiting for a Starlink launch as well. But a very dramatic backdrop to SLS out at Path 39B, Florida, showing off its the weather for the folks that maybe haven't been to the Space Coast in a little while, just reminding some of the other NSF team members what it's like out here. But it was an awesome shot, and hopefully the weather will cooperate come launch time for Artemis 1. You did also touch on another question I wanted to ask about the probability of violation, or the inverse of that, the probability, the P-GO, if you will. the percentage
Ah,
chance
I
of
like that.
acceptable the percentage chance of acceptable weather for launch is currently forecasted to be 80% at the opening of the window, decreasing slightly as the window progresses, but still more likely than not to be favorable.
Mhm.
Of course, I think we can also probably agree that the primary concerns for whether or not this launch will occur on time is probably less of a weather consideration and more of a this is a new rocket making its first ever launch attempt, and technical
Exactly.
issues are perhaps to be expected.
Exactly.
But that said, they also have a 2-hour launch window to work within. The window opens at 8:33 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. That is 12:33 UTC, and it's a 2-hour window, so extended to 10:33 a.m. Eastern or 14:33 UTC. They have time to work on whether weather issues come up or technical issues.
And I think one other thing with that, Thomas, is they are right on their timeline, if not slightly ahead of their timeline right now. The teams have been doing an absolutely wonderful job of monitoring the weather conditions, working with the 45th Weather Squadron here to move and shift the things around and account that they can to account for those weather delays that we have, or the weather impacts that we have seen with the strong storms that we've had, and that hold that I mentioned that is in the countdown right before the start of fueling, they actually extended that by about an hour to an hour and a half from the countdown that they were using during the wet dress rehearsal campaign, because of all the issues they had with the changeover from air purge to gaseous nitrogen purge to inert the vehicle ahead of fueling. So they've actually, not just from their timeline perspective being right on it, but that extra hour to hour and a half that they added to the hold before fueling ops begin will also enable them more time to either work any issues with the changeover to the GN2 or to have the full 2 hours to troubleshoot anything that does come up during the fueling process. So overall, we are looking very, very good for the attempt for tomorrow morning.
And of course, the big point will be once fueling starts, because there's a lot of milestones in there that could, that's where issues could arise as well. We are still in the pre-fueling phase of the countdown, but definitely worth mentioning that everything is on track right now, and that is as good of a start as we can expect. And we'll stay tuned later tonight for some of the more, I guess, business end of the countdown as the countdown starts to pick up from there as well. Here's some other super chats and questions that have come through here. Again, tag us at NASA Spaceflight. I've got no shortage of questions. This show could probably go for like 5 hours if we wanted to, but some of us have to get out to the press site still. So we'll come
And we
back
need
for
your
launch
questions
coverage
for
in
launch
hours.
day.
Yeah, exactly. If we don't get to any questions during this show, come back
We'll
to the
have
launch
plenty
stream
of
and we'll
time.
have plenty of time. Musical Wolves does say we have 2 longer shuttle SRBs, an extended shuttle tank, and it's hard to see SLS without picturing where's the shuttle. Musical Wolves, thank you for the support. They're definitely for some of us, this is as close as they'll get to seeing a shuttle launch. I saw one shuttle launch in person ever. I know a couple of the other people in this call have seen a couple, but I know some team members are very excited to see RS-25s and shuttle SRBs in action.
Oh yes.
Yes, and even those who have seen it before, I'm sure, are very excited to see them happen again.
We're just missing some wings, and the payload bay has been replaced by Orion, but it's we've got the shuttle engines again. They've just we replaced the orbiter boat tail with an external tank with the core stage.
Yep, there you go. Emily Goddard says, "Go SLS." Thank you, Emily, for the support there as well. And Luke saying we now are covering some actual NASA spaceflight. I mean, you could also say that about like the commercial crew missions and stuff, but I see the point of the message, and we appreciate that. It's been a while since we were covering NASA operated vehicles, I suppose. Well, all right, we've been covering.
It's
SLS
been 11 years.
Yeah, a NASA operated launch, I guess.
A NASA operated launch where it is NASA personnel operating it for a NASA vehicle. Yeah, been 11 years.
There you go. All right, some more questions coming in here. Bunker saying, obviously the launch tower is functional, but does it still have a lean? That was a story the NASA Spaceflight covered extensively. This mobile launcher just having a leaning issue, but not expected to affect operations, correct?
Oh gosh, no! I don't even think it's leaning anymore. I'm pretty sure they corrected that when and figured out what was going on with that. I never heard anything after the initial it's leaning, and then they corrected that years ago.
Okay, cool. Good to clarify that. Okay. I missed this conversation in a previous live stream, so I'm going to ask it again. Jesme says, is it true that SLS is actually Ares 5? What's the Ares and SLS connection that I
Oh, it
heard
is
Philip and
not.
Chris went off about?
I mean, it is not Ares 5. It is not just a copy of Ares 5 or Ares 4 or any of the Ares rockets, but it does carry a lot of lineage from that. And if you do look at what some of the initial ideas were for the Ares 5 rocket, it looks very, very similar, especially the combined crew and cargo version of the Ares vehicles that they were talking about at one point. But it is worth pointing out things like, the big heavy lifter for the Ares program never really went into design production like the Ares 1 crew vehicle did. That one was always going to come later than that. It had different design characteristics. Philip, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure it had 5 RS-25s instead of 4. It had like 5.5 segment solid rocket boosters instead of 5. So I mean, like, they definitely took things from the Ares and the Constellation program and said, let's not reinvent the wheel. We were already sort of going down this path. Let's continue it. But the Ares 5 rocket had not actually done anything substantial in its preliminary development or design phase by the time Constellation was canceled and we transitioned to SLS. Now, is it true that they kind of PR paint scheme changed SLS so it didn't look like the Ares rockets? Yeah, that's totally true. But this is not a like, oh, they just took Ares 5 and made SLS out of it. But it does carry a lot of those initial ideas forward.
Cue that picture of Bill Nelson pointing to the white and black painted SLS.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Just to we won't let's not completely rehash that, but let me throw out a couple of things. So the core for the Ares 5 at the time of cancellation was using RS-68s, and it was already a 10-meter diameter core at that point. So this vehicle that we're looking at here is, I would say the main similarity between the two is that it draws on a little bit of shuttle lineage. It draws completely on the Ares 1. You're basically looking at a vehicle with 2 Ares 1 first stages flanking the core stage. But yeah, the Ares 5 was, I mean, really, it was still really a paper rocket at the time Constellation was canceled.
Right, exactly. Oh yes, Patrick, you can absolutely show that if you want. There's the picture we're talking about.
It's the picture.
Is then Senator Bill Nelson in front of then NASA Administrator Charles Bolden giving a very emphatic presentation about SLS. And as you can see, SLS looks a little bit different these days, but Bill Nelson's still around now at NASA Administrator, which is funny. But that's what we're talking about if you don't know the reference to the black and white SLS paint job. I've heard some opinions that people like that paint job better. I personally like the orange better, but maybe that's just me.
Me too.
You too? Okay, good. Just me.
I like the orange better. And not just the fact that, I mean, let's go over this. It was never going to be black and white because that is a massive amount of paint and weight to just add for absolutely no reason. So it was always going to be orange. It was just a PR poster.
Yeah, I think that the livery or livery, what do they call it? They dressed it up to look like a Saturn V, really, more than anything. But it absolutely, as Chris said, it absolutely was PR only.
There you go. More questions coming in here. Here's a good one from Osiris, who says, will the SLS do a yaw maneuver right off the pad similar to Saturn V? Any sort of like immediate liftoff maneuvers?
Great question. No, you typically do not do those when you have major thrust to weight differences, like 1.5 to 1, which is what SLS has, and those gigantic solid rocket boosters. You typically don't do the yaw maneuver to get away from the tower. SLS will rise straight off that tower. It'll clear it in about 6 seconds, going pure vertical. And the first major maneuver after it leaves the launch pad will be what they're referring to as the pitch and roll maneuver, which will pitch the vehicle onto the proper degree heading while simultaneously rolling it onto the proper course. So there might be a little bit of yaw action in that regard, but it's not going to do like the Saturn V yaw maneuver to avoid the tower or anything like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, none of that Ares 1 nonsense, am I right? Anyway.
Oh gosh,
It'll
no! Oh
look
my
like-
gosh, no!
It'll actually it'll look a lot like the shuttle lift off and roll, except of course you don't have the off axis. Shuttle couldn't have launched with an umbilical tower in this position here because
Right.
the vehicle did the tower is to the north, the rockets to the south. The shuttle actually sort of walked from south to north, and the service towers were basically on the far side of this picture. We're looking due west here.
Yeah, there you go. And you actually touched on another question I wanted to bring in because Arda is asking, will we see XLS visibly move or stretch or strain between RS-25 ignition and SRB ignition? Of course, referring to the twang of the space shuttle. But that was a result of the off center of mass thrust, right? That's not going to be something we'll see in an inline rocket like SLS.
That is exactly correct. The twang on the shuttle was because of the offline thrust of the three main engines firing through the center of mass of the stack literally pushed it 25 feet at the top of the external tank backwards, and then they had to wait for it to go back to vertical, which is why the shuttle main engine launch sequence was light the engines at 6.6 seconds, because that is exactly the moment you needed to ignite the first one so that you rocked back to perfect vertical at T0 for the solid rockets to ignite. Because SLS is inline, no, there will be no twang to SLS. The core stage engines will ignite. SLS will stay perfectly vertical at 90 degrees. And also, too, because it is an inline engine or an inline design for the engines now, after the main engines are put through their gimbaling checks just before ignition, they are put into the null position, and null position is liftoff position too. So they will not cant inward toward each other like you saw the shuttle do, where they had,
right, yep.
where shuttle sort of ignited them in the null position, and then they all three moved to the liftoff position at T-3 seconds. SLS does not have to do that. So the position they are in when they ignite is the position they are locked into for the initial vertical climb off the pad. And here's another cool thing. I really want to get this out. So this is a really cool thing about these engines. And this is a cool thing that Aerojet told us in an interview. So really thanks to the Aerojet folks for this. They pulled small little components from all three of the RS-25s that launched Columbia on STS-1 in April 1981. There is a component from the STS-1 engines on all four RS-25s that will launch Artemis-1 to the moon. And they range from bolts to wires that they pulled from the old STS-1 engines. So there is something of STS-1 on this rocket to get it to orbit.
That is very cool. I remember reading about that when I was proofreading our launch article, which will go live at the conclusion of this broadcast. But also touching on that, we do have some questions just about the flight heritage for these engines. And actually, I think I actually have I have the flight histories in front of me, so I can read this out. Because, as you mentioned, all four of these engines have some small components that have been swapped out of things, such as the STS-1 engines. But the engines themselves, the main assemblies, have also already been to space several times. So if we go through the four RS-25 main engines, we have engine 2045, which has been to space 12 times aboard three different orbiters, Endeavour, Discovery, and Atlantis. We have engine 56, which has been to space 4 times, flying aboard Discovery, Atlantis. It is also the only engine to have flown aboard Columbia before. Engine 58 flew on Discovery and Atlantis for a combination of 6 flights, and engine 60, 3 different flights aboard Endeavour, Discovery, and Atlantis, including the last shuttle flight, STS-135. Also worth noting that there are lots of different flight histories for all the different segments of those solid rocket boosters, the vast majority of which have been to space before, up to 7 flights to space and back for some of those segments. So lots of flight-proven hardware, if you will. Of course, this will be their last flight, no longer on a reusable vehicle, but making use of some of the shuttle inventory for hardware for engines and booster segments for the first couple Artemis flights.
And I'd have to go look at the casing histories, but it's not just necessarily the casings that can be reused on the boosters. And Northrop Grumman has indicated there's also something from STS-1 on them as well.
Okay, yeah, I don't think it's the actual like full casings. I'm looking at the history. I
Yeah.
don't see STS-1 anywhere, but
Yeah,
little
so they
components
pulled
like that
something
for sure.
else. Exactly. So they pulled little components that they saved from those. Yeah.
Oh, and also thank you, Alex, for pointing out the other thing. The Orion main engine, the AJ-10 variant engine that is on the European service module of the Orion spacecraft, is also the same engine as the orbiter maneuvering system for the space shuttle, and those engines are being reused from the orbiters for the first few flights. So each orbiter had 2, so there's basically 6 of those OMS engines around. Plus, I don't know, was there a supply of extra engines as well that they can still use?
There might have been leftovers at the end of the program because, and I'm basing that off of the fact that we keep saying, oh, there were 16 RS-25s left over from the shuttle program. There were only 14 that flew, and then they had one that was fully assembled but never flew, and then they had one that they had to assemble. So that's how they got the 16. So they might have extra OMS nozzles or engines just as backups for the end of the program that were lying around. But what I think is really, really interesting on this one, because we talked about the fact that one of the RS-25s was on a Columbia mission. Well, the old orbiter maneuvering system engine that they have on Orion's ESM, the European Service Module for this one, was part of missions for Discovery, Atlantis, and the Challenger.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
That is
because the
very cool.
OMS pods were plug and play. So they could pull the OMS pods from different orbiters and they fit all of them. So some of the original ones that debuted with Challenger then got pulled off Challenger and then were around after we lost her.
Very
Yeah,
interesting.
I don't know what I'm maybe somebody in the back can find it. I'm trying to remember what story it was in. But I think the serial number on this engine is 111. But what they did, so they gave us the flight history for this engine, and so the first flight was on STS-41G, which was well, I guess that was actually Sally Ride's second flight. But there was a famous swap of OMS engines between, well, maybe not famous, but between Challenger and Atlantis in that time frame. And but they gave us a flight history, but what they didn't give us, which I thought would have been kind of cool, is which OMS pod they went in, because we always used to get in the flight histories right pod, left pod. So Challenger flew with LP and RP01 on 41G, and so it started on 41G, and then it stayed with Atlantis through STS-30, and then it flew on Discovery kind of in that post Challenger time frame, and then it moved over to Atlantis, and these could correspond to RP01 movements. But then there's a big gap between STS-46, which was in July, or that launched in July 1992, and then the engine showed up again on an OMS pod on STS-101, but that wasn't until May of 2000. So Atlantis, after STS-46, went into one of its orbiter maintenance down periods, or went back out to Palmdale. And so usually they took off the forward RCS and the OMS pods and left those at the hypergolic maintenance facility at Kennedy Space Center. So, I would have been curious to see which pods it was assigned to throughout those flights.
Maybe we can do some additional research on that and come back to it. But definitely cool to see how many flights that engine has flown, including all the way back to Space Shuttle Challenger on a flight. So that's cool.
Which means there's literally something from every space shuttle mission on that rocket.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, well, sorry.
Well, every orbiter.
From every orbiter. That's what I meant. Yes. Yeah.
Very cool. All right, some more questions coming in here. Ryan asking, what is the reasoning behind why the SRBs will not be recovered, talking about reusing this hardware? Can you go into the decision? What led to the expendable SRBs on the SLS design?
Yeah, two things for this. One, it is primarily a mass consideration, trying to eke out all of the performance that they can from the rocket, so to put through translunar injection. That recovery hardware costs a lot of money to put on. It costs mass onto the solid rocket boosters, which limits what the rocket can lift. So that was one of the guiding reasons that they decided not to recover the solid rockets this time. Technology has also increased all of that data that we need to prove that the seals are working, that the joints worked fine, that there wasn't hot gas pass penetration into the O-rings or anything like that. That can all be transmitted to the ground now during flight. So we don't need to recover them for that particular reason. And also the cost associated with recovering them, it's not just, rent a boat and go out and get them. It's designing all the recovery hardware, getting all of that ready, hiring people, maintaining the boats between the year-long gaps between these missions, since SLS is only predicted to fly once per year, potentially surging to 2 later in the decade if needed. It's not cost effective to recover them anymore. And with all of the advancements in manufacturing technologies and processes, it's actually just cheaper to use up the existing casings that we have from the shuttle program, and then switch to more lightweight composite style casings, which are just as strong, just as rigid, but are lighter weight. They cost significantly less to produce, and then also switching the boosters. The hydrazine systems that drive their hydraulic power units to move the engine nozzles, they are going to be switching from that when they are hydrazine on this one, but they're going to be switching to electric thrust vector control, which will also greatly improve safety and reduce cost. So it's actually cheaper to throw them away after every mission than it is to recover them. And it gives you more performance through translunar injection, so you can bring more to the moon.
There you go. Thank you, Chris, for that.
Just a couple of other notes. I when SLS was first green-lighted, and you think back to the picture of Senator Nelson again, but they'd planned all along to upgrade the overall vehicle, including an upgraded upper stage, which will be folded in first, and then upgraded boosters. I think originally they had actually had it the other way around, but remember we said these boosters were the Ares 1 crew launch vehicle first stage, and so the ballistics for the boosters, the thrust trace that they will burn to tomorrow, hopefully, was tailored for Ares 1, and so one of the things they'll get by moving to a booster and a thrust trace that is tailored to SLS, and it's the same thing as basically the same thing what Chris G is saying. It's going to improve the performance of the vehicle.
Right, there we go. Thanks. Some other questions coming here. This is a €50 super chat. So, Ellen, I want to thank you for your support.
Nice.
This is a bit of a heavy-hitting question, but I'm going to ask it because it's worth talking about. Here is the question. Is this, Artemis 1, the most expensive launch ever?
Ooh.
Now, here's some things to consider while Chris and Phil think about this.
Yeah.
The things to consider. There are different ways of measuring the cost of a specific launch. In theory, if a rocket only ever flies once, cough, cough, Ares 1, technically the entire development cost also goes towards the cost of that launch. And thank you, Patrick. Thank you for putting Ares 1 on screen. Listen, you're getting me to slander one of my favorite rockets on broadcast, and you got to rub it in like that. Anyway, so if a rocket only flies once...
I'll say this. That was the last rocket to launch off of this pad, so you've got the last one to launch and then the live look at the next one right now, at least.
That is pretty cool. That is cool. What was the last... If you go before Ares 1, because that was
STS
suborbital test flight, STS-116?
STS-116 on December 9th, 2006 was the last time an orbital mission launched from Pad B.
What orbiter was that?
Discovery.
Very cool. Chris G with the shuttle encyclopedia knowledge. That was before STS-400 went to the pad, but of course didn't launch, correct?
Yes, indeed. And that was the interesting thing, because STS-400 was the rescue mission for Hubble, and it actually rolled out twice, because the Hubble mission rolled out twice before Hubble had an incident and they needed to delay so they could fix it. And Endeavour went out to Pad B twice. So Endeavour was the last orbital launch vehicle to be on that pad before SLS today. But they basically took STS-400 right to the start of countdown operations, but never actually entered it.
Right,
so this is the first launch countdown since 2009, when Ares 1X was out there. And Ares 1X was actually the last vehicle that occupied that pad, because she went out after Endeavour was done with 400.
And a great photo there of two shuttles on 39A and 39B. I don't think that's the STS-400 vehicle. I think that's a different time when there were two shuttles out at the same time. But still a
Let
very
me look
cool
real
photo.
quick.
It's
That
the one
might
with
be.
the rainbow in the background, if you know what I'm talking about.
The
Yeah.
one with the rainbow. Oh, see, are the lightning towers complete at 39B? Or not?
No, they are not.
Then that was the first STS 400.
Oh, well,
There
geez,
you can
okay,
see the
I stand corrected.
foundations. You can see the bases of them there. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that was the 2008 one.
Mm-hmm.
I would, in terms of most expensive launch ever, Saturn V was pretty expensive. So it might
Yeah.
give this launch a run for its money, but it is possible that this is the most expensive launch ever.
I
yeah.
would agree with you, Philip. I think if there's one that's going to beat it, it would be Apollo 4, because just like SLS, if you're going to include the development cost, you've got to include the development cost for Apollo 4 then, and the entire Saturn
Right.
V program. So if there's one that beat it and was more expensive, and I'm going to use that by saying adjusting for inflation as well,
Mm-hmm.
it would be Apollo 4. Yeah.
So yeah, and you also, there's ground infrastructure that gets built for these launches that obviously.
Oh, and Apollo
Like-
4, you had to build the entire launch pad in VAB.
Right.
So it's
yeah.
got
So there's
it's got to
no
be
way
it's
that
got
this
to
is.
be Apollo 4. Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
You
so
know,
that
this
is
is
when
a-
you incorporate all of the development costs into a launch or a cost per launch basis. The more often a rocket flies, the more of that development cost gets split up among all the launches, and your cost per launching goes down if you're measuring it that way. You could
Yeah.
also just measure it as to if you remove the development and overhead, not the overhead, the development costs, and only take the costs that you incur when you take on a new mission or a new launch contract. That obviously that's going to be a much smaller number, and that's more based on is the vehicle reusable? Is it how cheap are the expendable components to manufacture? How cheap are your actual operational costs, like your launch controllers and things like that? Your range assets, there's a lot of different ways to measure these things, which is why this is a very complicated question. But yeah, if the spirit of the question likely alluding to development costs, I think is probably the strongest answer is no, because there was a lot of infrastructure investment for the Apollo program, which this launch is, at least some of which, leveraging because we're back at 39B.
Yeah,
That's a great question, but it's complicated to answer. Yeah.
One of the things that they talk about, things you have to remember about Apollo, which is why I kind of call it the Apollo singularity because of the budget. The NASA budget, and this was before they even flew, by fiscal year 1966, reached about 4% of the entire federal budget. And so NASA gets nothing like that now. I think it's still under 1% of the federal budget right now. So, they obviously, the other thing they did was they did the more of the traditional development funding curve, where you front load the funding to get the development done as quickly as possible. And this one, this one's been flat budget pretty much the whole time, increasing slightly, but nothing like the budget increases that you saw after Kennedy's speech in May of '61.
And the other thing to bear in mind with this that has sort of inflated the cost a bit more is Orion was originally supposed to be ready in 2013 for its first flight on Ares 1Y. And Orion as SLS has encountered delays, the Orion program has encountered delays, and therefore that cost has gone up, but not necessarily because Orion needed it, but just because of the delays in its launch vehicle. So that's another sort of complicating factor in how you actually decide what do you ascribe to the budget for Artemis 1 versus the programmatic budget overall.
Yep, exactly. All right, we got so many questions here. We're going to have to try to get through as many as we can. Again, if you don't get to your question, hold on to launch coverage. We'll have plenty of time to answer more of them. But here's a really interesting one I want to pour out. Outdoors Band Show addresses this to Chris G. Do the Canadian astronauts, which we have seen walking around the press site the last couple days, will they need to be flying on Dragon or Starliner, basically a flight aboard the International Space Station, before they can be eligible for selection for an Artemis mission?
Great question. The answer is no. No, they're so NASA sort of wanted all of their Artemis generation astronauts to have experience on board the International Space Station, but it's not a requirement for JAXA, for ESA, or for CSA. Although I would say that ESA and JAXA have probably a better option of like their first people who fly will have been to the station before. But no, the two Canadian astronauts who have sort of consistently been here during Artemis events are Jeremy Hansen and Joshua Kutrick. Jeremy Hansen has been here a lot more than Josh Kutrick, but Josh has also been doing some moon surface analog testing up in the maritime provinces with NASA astronauts as well. So it's a pretty good bet it's going to be one of the two of them for Artemis 2, but there is no requirement to send them to the International Space Station before Artemis 2.
There we go. Thank you, Chris, for that. Let's see, what else? Here is another shuttle question. Simcha asking, will the engines start in the same sequence as they did on the space shuttle?
In a way, but there are 4 instead of 3. So it is still a staggered start sequence. The ignition sequence begins at T-minus 6.36 seconds, not T-minus 6.6. I am aware that the briefing this morning gave a different number. I'm quoting the number that NASA and Aerojet Rocketdyne are giving, that the engine start sequence begins at T-minus 6.36 seconds. And then they are staggered start, 120 milliseconds apart from one another, and they start 4, 3, 2, 1 in that sequence. And that is how they will start. And I know I said 120 milliseconds. I know a different number was given at the press conference this morning. NASA and Aerojet Rocketdyne confirm it's 120 milliseconds staggered between the start commands for all 4 of the engines.
Right. I mean, and you have, shuttle only had 3 engines, and those started engine, so engine 1 was the center engine 2 is left, engine 3 right, and those started engine 3, engine 2, engine 1. For this vehicle, the start sequence is engine 1, then engine 3, engine 4, engine 2.
It's reversed.
So
it's 1, 3, 4, 2.
Yeah. So let's see. Do we have okay? If we're looking at it this way, so looking at it from this point of view, you would be looking at engine 4 to the left, so to speak, the left of the booster, engine 3 to the right, and then behind them you have engine 1 and engine 2. Engine 1 and engine 4, by the way, are the ones that got the little bit of extra ablative material placed on some of the hat bands that ring the nozzle, because those ones are going to be facing directly into the aft booster separation motors when those separate at a little bit after 2 minutes. They did do some testing on those, and they sort of iterated on the thermal analysis on them. Originally, they thought they were going to need to put a lot of that ablative material on the hat bands on all 4 engines, and what it turns out is they're able to just put them on arcs of a few of the hat bands that have the get the worst of the BSM firings before the boosters get far enough away.
Right, there you go. All right, I'm going to speed run some super chats here really quick because there's some questions in here as well. Homebound Traveler, thank you for the support there. Let's see, what else? Here's an interesting question. Maybe this is a question for you, Philip. Funstain with the $20 super chat, thank you, says, do the benefits of Starship's steel composition include avoiding the cold shock phenomenon, making fueling comparatively more rapid than SLS? Talking about the fueling timeline there. Any comparisons between the foam insulation on SLS versus the bare steel on Starship and things like that?
That actually might be a better question for Chris G. I mean, in terms of contrasting with SLS, I think the bigger issue in terms of thermal shock is obviously liquid hydrogen, and I think the liquid methane, even though it's super cooled, or even the liquid oxygen that's super cooled for Starship, is not quite as cold as liquid hydrogen, and I think that was possibly a conscious choice. You don't see a lot of sustainer stages or first stages anymore that use hydrogen if they can avoid it. But maybe Chris G can speak a little bit more to the Starship.
Yeah, it's the same sort of function, but the speed at which the vehicle is fueled does not necessarily have to do with cryogenic conditioning. The main point that you're looking at for cryo conditioning is when you need to chill down the transfer lines and chill down the initial MPS, main propulsion system lines, so they are not cryo shocked. And Starship does that. We see chill down underway, so Starship still undergoes that same process as does the Falcon 9. Other than that, it comes down to your fueling systems, and it comes down to the pumps that you have. It comes down to the timelines and the countdown. Are you going to go into stable replenish? Are you just trying to fuel as quickly as you can to eliminate boil off? Those are then sort of the design trade-offs for the vehicle. And because SLS is going to fuel and then need to sit on the launch pad fully fueled while crew gets on board and everything for the rest of its flights, there's no need to fuel it massively quick. And the sort of the pumps and the way that NASA works, they're much more used to these prolonged fueling campaigns. But I will point out that fast fill, like the 530,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen that pump into the core stage tank, liquid hydrogen loading begins liquid hydrogen slow fill into the rocket begins at L-7 hours 5 minutes, and it is fully fueled 2 hours later with liquid hydrogen. So they fill that tank very quickly for liquid hydrogen. But remember too, with liquid hydrogen, it is extremely flammable. It is small. It has one valence electron, and it loves to connect with something else that has another valence, the electron in its outer shell, which isn't necessarily the case with methane, even though methane is combustible. So there's more safety precautions you have to take with hydrogen. And I don't mean that to mean there are no safety precautions with methane. There very much are, but you have to be a little more cautious with hydrogen than you can with some other propellants.
All right, there we go.
Because of that, it's a lot less. It's a lot less dense than liquid oxygen, as an example.
Yeah.
So as we were talking about the sequence tomorrow, they'll start with liquid oxygen on the core stage, and even though they start LH2 after liquid oxygen, they'll finish loading the LH2 tank way before the liquid oxygen tank finishes loading.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, worth mentioning, we talk about the relative densities, and I love pointing this out on rockets. You can totally see it on SLS. If you're looking at the core stage, you see that line running up the front of the rocket from this perspective up into the intertank, that band where there's kind of two lighter colored lines at the top and bottom of the intertank section of the core stage. That is where the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen tanks meet, and the domes on the top and bottom of those tanks meet there. The bottom part that is much, much taller than the top part, the bottom part is liquid hydrogen, and the top part is liquid oxygen. The liquid hydrogen is so much less dense than liquid oxygen that the tanks are literally drastically different sizes, so that when they're being mixed in the engines, you drain both of them evenly. Obviously, you don't want to run out of one before the other. So that's a really cool indicator of the difference in densities between different propellants, and it's most obvious in the Hydrolox rocket.
Mm-hmm. Especially especially the types of engines that are used too, which can affect the size of the tanks, as you talk about, right, to drain them equally for what the rocket needs. Yeah. And that also quickly ties in with another question asking about what type of fuel is on board this rocket. Both the first and upper stages are using liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. The upper stage, of course, being the ICPS, or basically a modified Delta IV upper stage. So they're both using liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and then of course you have the solid fuel in the side boosters. Yes, and the solid fuel is polybutadiene acrylotrile, if I'm saying that right, and ammonium perchlorate composite propellant is the solid components in the solid rocket boosters, and then the Orion service, the European service module utilizes monomethyl hydrazine and mixtures of niters, mixtures of it's nitrous oxide.
Thomas. Tetroxide.
It's not nitrogen tetroxide. It's like mixtures of
mixed oxides of nitrogen is.
There we go. Mixed oxides of nitrogen is technically what it uses. So that is the propellant on board SLS. Yes.
Yeah, and full credit to Chris for going for the solid rocket fuel name. I just give up. I never even attempt it. So good.
They just use the acronym. They just call it PBAN.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why
I can remember.
Yep.
All right. Here is another really cool super chat here from Douglas, $50. Thank you so much for the generous support there. But a really cool message, kind of personal. They're using an OMS engine, of course. We talked about that. I tested some fuel probes for those shuttle tanks. Yay. Douglas, thank you for your contribution to the space industry and the shuttle program. Glad that you're going to be able to see another OMS engine, this one going to the moon on Artemis 1. Very cool. And here is a quick
fun
question.
fact.
Oh,
Sorry, fun fact. So the OMS engines, right, were for the shuttle program were used to complete the orbit, right? Because the shuttle, just like SLS, would initially drop off on a suborbital trajectory for external tank disposal, and then 30 some odd minutes after liftoff, the two OMS engines would fire to perform the perigee raise maneuver. And then they would be used for large scale maneuvers in orbit, but then they would also do the deorbit burn at the end of the mission. And this engine that did X number of deorbit burns for the missions that it flew on with Challenger, Discovery, and Atlantis, will do the deorbit burn for the Orion craft as well. But that deorbit burn will take place at the moon.
Yeah.
But it will still do the deorbit burn. It just will do the farthest deorbit burn it has ever done in its lifetime.
Yep. Thank you there, Chris. Bring in another question here from Dan saying, I'm local and going to see SLS. How soon should I get to Titusville? Maybe around midnight? Do we have any launch viewing advice?
Get there at midnight. Yep, get there at midnight. I can tell you this. We took a drive down US 1 here in Titusville along the river around noon today. Some of the spots are already completely inundated with people camping out. So get there. And plan to be there overnight. Yeah, if you're not in place by 2:30 a.m., you're not going to get the spot you want on the river. I'm just going to say that now. You got to get there early. NASA, for full disclosure, has warned all of us coming on base that we need to be here by no later than 2:30, or they do not believe we will get in because of the traffic.
Philip, did you have something to add? Sorry.
I mean, Chris said it. All I was going to say was just the basic: get there early, get there as early as you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there we go. Here is a cool question from Iceblade Rage, who says, which mission control center are they using for Artemis 1? And I'll also add on which launch control centers. So what are the two control facilities in use for Artemis 1?
We were just looking at when the camera spun around to the VAB, you can see the launch control center for Launch Complex 39 in the foreground there. And so, yeah, that's where the launch control center is. There's 4 firing rooms inside the launch control center. And I think for this launch, I believe they're going to be using 3 of them, at least. Firing room 1 is the primary firing room. And then firing room 2 will be the support room. And then firing room 3, I think they're still using for doing some diagnostic testing. And then I believe firing room 4 is used by SpaceX, I believe, during their 39A launches, if I recall correctly. So the Mission Control Center in Houston is where control of flight will transition immediately at liftoff. And that's, I want to say that they're not using. I don't think they're using the old shuttle flight control room, but there's a complex of flight control rooms. Obviously, they have one that the International Space Station is using. They can interchange them a little bit, but this will be a dedicated room, and those 2 missions will be running concurrently side by side. And this is a fairly long. This would be longer than any shuttle mission at almost 6 weeks. So. And they will be staffed 24/7. I'm not sure how many shifts they're going to be doing though. But yeah, those are the 2 main control centers in terms of sort of direct control of Orion is from mission control, and the launch control center, which is kind of off to the left from this view. The VAB is the launch control center is sort of adjacent to the VAB.
Gotcha. All right, bringing some more questions in. Let's see here. Paul asking, once their mission is completed, where will the upper stages, so both ICPS and Orion's service module, be disposed of?
Very good. The European Service Module will be destroyed during atmospheric entry. At the end of the mission, Orion will separate from it about 20 minutes ahead of atmospheric entry, and the ESM will be on the same trajectory, so it will burn up in a disposal pattern over the Pacific Ocean, and then Orion will continue on using its heat shield and aerodynamic lift capabilities to land off the coast of San Diego in a 2,100 kilometer band that they can choose any part of that line to land depending on weather on the day. After the ice, however, earlier in the mission, after the ICPS does the translunar injection burn and Orion separates and all the CubeSats separate from it, it will do a blowdown disposal maneuver, which will send it onto a heliocentric disposal orbit. So basically, it will enter orbit of the sun and be disposed of that way.
There we
The
go.
ICPS basically delivers itself and Orion on a lunar flyby trajectory, and so that blowdown maneuver will basically target a lunar flyby that slingshots it into that solar orbit.
All right. All right, we got another question here. This one is about launch abort criteria, pre-liftoff abort criteria. Could they abort liftoff after they light the SRBs, or is that the point of no return for liftoff?
That is the point of no return. At that, once the solid rocket boosters light, it is an in-flight abort. So a couple things here. When they go to ignite, they can obviously stop before they ignite the RS-25 engines if there is an issue with that. After the RS-25s ignite, and for that 6.36 seconds that they are igniting or up at 100% rated performance and doing their health checks, if any issue with them is discovered at that point, you can shut them down prior to the vehicle sending the command to light the solid rocket boosters. If that were to happen, where you had an engine shutdown on the pad prior to SRB separation, that would be a pad abort. The hydrogen burn-off igniters, which is what they're called for this program, they are the ROFIs, the radial outward firing initiators, just two different names for the same thing. They will fire at T-minus 12 or 10 seconds. We've actually gotten some conflicting numbers on that, but they will ignite about 12 to 10 seconds prior to the anticipated liftoff, but they are also timed to fire for 30 seconds so that if there is an engine shutdown on the pad, they keep firing to keep burning off the excess hydrogen that might be in the area as the engines are shut down. And they will keep firing, and then the Firex water and all the other water that comes on to sort of help control potential fires or prevent fires from happening, all of that will come up just like it did on the shuttle program in that regard. So prior to SRB ignition, you can abort on the pad and you can be fine. But once the solids light, you are committed to liftoff. In fact, that is called commit. You are committing the vehicle to flight at that point. There are no hold down bolts, so literally SLS, once you light those solid rockets, nothing can keep it to the ground, even if there were clamps. 8 million pounds of thrust, you are leaving the ground at that point.
Right, gotcha. All right, let's see what else. Jimmy has a question about the hydrogen leak fix. This is what came up at the wet dress rehearsal campaign. What is the latest, maybe Philip, I'll lend this one to you, the latest on how the teams believe that fix will hold up, and when might we hear about when that fix is actually verified to be good or not?
Well, let's do the second question first, because we got a very specific time. Although again, it'll just,
I know, that's
we'll
why
have
I
to see
asked.
how fueling goes. But Charlie Blackwell Thompson was talking about this yesterday, I guess, in the mission management team media briefing, and she expects that they'll know about 5 hours before the opening of the launch window, so around 3:30 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow morning. Assuming, as you guys are laughing about, yes, if they stay on kind of the nominal timeline where they start the liquid oxygen chill downs around 12:20 a.m., then somewhere around 3 hours later, they will get to the point where they'll be testing out that LH2 bleed quick disconnect, and it sounds like they did basically what they thought they were going to need to do once they saw the issue, which was they went back and looked at the seals on the core stage, and they realize that these are the same seals, even though they've been connected and disconnected at Stennis for the green run, and then connected and disconnected at Kennedy several times for all of these tests. They had not changed those seals out, and I think that's a lesson learned. Is there if you get this kind of exercising that seal where you're doing a connect and disconnect of something like that, they'll probably look to change their maintenance and service requirements and change those out more. And so they feel that by changing those seals out to fresh ones rather than 2-year-old ones, that should take care of the issue. But we will see. So the sequence tomorrow will be they will completely load the liquid hydrogen tank, so they'll get all the way to the top. They'll go into stable replenish, and then they will do they will start this liquid hydrogen engine bleed, where they will, and they call it kickstart because they have to close. They actually have to put some pressure up at the top of the tank on the hydrogen to force it into the engine inlets, all 4 of the engine inlets. And then the hydrogen then goes through the engine plumbing to this. Again, we talk about chill downs. Again, you don't want to shock the engine hardware. And so they're constantly circulating for the last couple of hours of the countdown, circulating liquid hydrogen through those. And then after they circulate through the engine plumbing, then they duct out to the tail service masts, and they actually are dumped overboard through this bleed line. And so then they go out through plumbing on the mobile launcher, and eventually out to a sort of a septic tank, and then eventually all the way out to the flare stack. So, but again, about 3 hours after fueling starts, we should be getting notifications from from launch control. So we'll be listening basically once they get to liquid hydrogen replenish on the core stage tank. That's when we should start listening to hear whether this leak was fixed.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Philip. Bring in a bunch of Superjet support and stuff I want to thank really quickly here. Jacob says the first few SLS launches should have been that white paint just like the shuttle. Appreciate the support there, Jacob. Valkman says it's my birthday. So Valk, thank you so much for your support and happy birthday. Hopefully the eve of Artemis 1, you get a candle 1 day late, unfortunately. But
2 big candles. 2 big candles.
Oh, there you go. That is true, actually. And then we got Mechazilla dropping a total of 10 Red Team membership, 2 donations of 5. So Mechazilla, thanks for the support. Also, Isaac the Swede with a new Red Team membership, and Yoka with a Capcom membership. Thank you all so much for your support. Greatly appreciated. Here is a question from Nate. This is a bit of a speculation question for the two of you. What do you think the chances of the launch tomorrow being scrubbed due to various troubles SLS may have? Thanks for the stream.
Oh, this is an excellent question. There are 2 ways to answer it, and I'm not really sure if one is less infuriating than the other, because it really is we won't know until we get to the day, right? But what are the overall chances? So I would answer it this way, right? It's a first-time vehicle, so absolutely no one should be surprised if something happens tomorrow and we cannot leave the ground. Whether that be a technical issue or something the teams are seeing that they're not just quite comfortable with and they need a little bit more time to go off and look at, whether it's something with the ground, and of course we've got the weather as well. So here's how I've sort of been answering this. There's a lot of heritage components and a lot of heritage hardware on this vehicle and the team has a lot of experience working with these types of systems. If we can get into hydrogen loading and there are no leaks and all of that is sort of fixed, I personally go with there's a good chance of lifting off tomorrow morning. I would say a better than 50% chance personally of lifting off, just based on the heritage, based on how the wet dress rehearsal campaigns went and how they sort of reacted after that to changing the countdown and aligning with some of those lessons learned. I personally say there's a good shot at getting off the ground tomorrow as long as there are no leaks during the fueling process.
I think I like that, and I think I'm on your side of that, Chris. Philip, what are your thoughts?
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I would say the 2 issues, sort of 2 groups of issues they've had are getting started with the tanking process. So they ran into several issues starting. So if they, that would be the additional caveat I would say is if they can get started on tanking on time, and we talked about how they extended that hold at T-minus 6 hours and 40 minutes from 1 hour 30 minutes to 2 hours and 30 minutes to give them some more time. But if they get started on the tanking process on time and there are no leaks, I agree with Chris. I think there's a pretty decent chance that they're gonna fly.
Sounds good to me. Thank you, guys. Let's see another question. Oh, here's one I could take. Andrew says, will there be a zero-G indicator on board? The answer is yes. We will have our good friend Snoopy on board Orion for Artemis 1.
Yeah, and there is someone yesterday, and I hope they are here again on launch day morning. There was someone yesterday walking around in a big Snoopy costume and the big orange pumpkin launch and entry suit, and that was really fun to see too. So I hope Snoopy's at the press site tomorrow as well. Yes.
Yes, and there is a bit of a tie-in there because isn't there an award? Oh, there we go. There's the zero-G indicator meeting
There it
Orion
is.
there. Thank you, Patrick. Wasn't there's an award that you can get? I don't know if it's specific to KSC or if
The
it's a
Silver
national-wide thing.
Snoopy.
Yes, thank you. And that's just like to acknowledge above and beyond accomplishment for the agency or something along those lines, right?
Yeah, it's a NASA Award of Excellence, basically.
Yeah.
In that regard. But it has but Snoopy was the name of the lunar excursion module on Apollo 10 that did the dress rehearsal for Apollo 11. So it also traces it back there because it was named after Snoopy from the Peanuts cartoons.
There you go. All right, other questions here. Space Guy asking, what will be the thrust-to-weight ratio on liftoff for SLS?
1.5 to 1 is the thrust-to-weight ratio.
And that is fast. If the numbers aren't, if you're not one that knows a bunch of thrust-to-weight ratios, the point of this question is that SLS will actually fly off of the pad. Those SRBs are very powerful, and especially in the Block 1 configuration where you only have the ICPS upper stage, not the big exploration upper stage. This vehicle will fly off the pad. It will accelerate pretty quickly. Should be a cool sight. On a similar note, Paul Angel is asking, will we get a roll program with SLS similar to Shuttle? I believe we will, right?
Oh, yes. Yep. So she is aligned basically on the pad facing due south. So she will roll. So like the part that you see that's facing south that does not face the tower, that is the part that will be the heads down configuration of the vehicle. That will be pointing, as the vehicle pitches over, will be pointing more and more and more toward the ground. And the roll program will align it onto the proper azimuth. The available azimuth ranges are 64 degrees down to about 120 degrees, with 0 being true north and 90 being true east. And at the opening of the window, the roll program would place it onto the 64 degree azimuth for a 37 degree inclination orbit, and then that azimuth will decrease as you go through the window down to 120 degrees, which is flying slightly south down toward the Bahamas without actually overflying land down there, and that would result in a 32 degree inclination orbit. And that is all predicated on the changing relative locations of the launch site to the moon as the moon moves in its orbit, the changing relative inclination of the moon to the launch site throughout the 2-hour window, and the westward drifting translunar injection point to account for those first two things. And that's what gets you the ever-changing azimuth or a flight path angle that SLS will go out on. To sort of complete that, they can theoretically or technically launch at any second within the launch window. There's no if they don't get 833, we have to stop and do another software upload. SLS's software will automatically know the exact second it lifts off the pad and know what to correspondingly roll the vehicle onto for the flight path for that. But however, within there, Charlie Blackwell Thompson, the launch director for tomorrow morning, did say there are about 35 to 40 2 to 3 second cutouts in the window to avoid other satellites in orbit. So they don't have all 120 minutes. They do have a few seconds here and there where they can't launch because they would hit another satellite or come too close to another satellite. But in general, that's what's in play for tomorrow morning.
Thank you. Also, some people in chat pointing out there was another zero-G indicator, and I forgot to mention this one. There are actually two. Snoopy's one, and there's also apparently the name is Sean the Sheep. I knew it was a sheep, but
Yes.
Sean the Sheep. I think that's an ESA contribution or something. Chris, do you know the story behind the sheep one?
I have heard them talk about it. I believe it is the ESA contribution to that. But I off the top of my head, I can't pull that out to give an accurate answer.
Yeah, okay. Well, maybe we'll come back to that one. But there is also a sheep zero-G indicator, apparently. Thank you, chat, for reminding me of the other one. All right, another question here. It's B says, how long will it take for Orion to orbit the moon? I believe it is about a 6-day transit out to the moon, correct?
It is. It is a 6-day transit out to the moon, at which point Orion will burn its engine to do the maneuver to get it into the distant retrograde orbit. Yeah.
And then we got a picture of Sean, by the way, so thank you for
Yes,
that,
and
Patrick.
Sean the
thank you,
sheep.
Chris.
And Sean the sheep is indeed. It is. It's part of. It's from Airbus and ESA. So yes, it is. It is the European zero-G indicator from Airbus.
Cool. On that front, Lorenzo is asking, at that moment, are the only space agencies working on this mission NASA and ESA, or are there others involved?
The Canadian Space Agency is involved as well in the Artemis program, although they do not have anything physically on SLS for Artemis 1, but they are involved as well with it. But in terms of the major flight components, it's NASA and their contractors, and then ESA and their contractors right now. Yes.
Right. Yeah, so they're the only ones with hardware on board Artemis 1, but for the Artemis program, CSA is involved, and also JAXA, correct?
Yes. So I want to clarify what you just said just a little bit in terms of hardware. There's no flight vehicle hardware. There's nothing on the rocket that came from CSA or JAXA, the Canadian Space Agency, and the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. I do not know if they personally have things on board Orion, so I'm not willing to say they don't have anything on the mission. They just do not have any part of the rocket.
Right.
The rocket comes from NASA. But yes, other than that, ESA and JAXA and the Canadian Space Agency are the biggest partners in this, and they will obviously have crew members on board. We know a Canadian will be on Artemis 2. We know 3 ESA astronauts. They're all building elements of the Gateway. Basically, it's everyone but Russia from the ISS is just continuing forward together.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Thank you, Chris. All right, another question here. Leopold with the super chat says, can we talk a bit about the flight termination system on SLS?
Philip?
Want to just give us an overview? Yeah, Philip, go for it.
I mean, it's. I think it's also alternately called the flight safety system, where the safety is there. The range is one of the range's responsibilities is to protect the population around the range, and so the flight termination system is basically as it sounds. So if they had an issue in flight where the range had to send the commands to the vehicle, I believe that the way that it would work, you can't obviously shut down the solid rocket boosters, although I guess we'll get to that in a moment. But the arm command would shut the core stage down, and that would also give if you had a crew on this mission, that would give the Orion the opportunity to abort off the vehicle. And then and then you send the destruct command, and that will unzip the boosters along the length of the boosters, and it will also do something similar to the core stage. You can't see it on this side, but on the back side of the core stage, it also has a systems tunnel that runs the length of pretty much the length of the vehicle, and so you basically would be sort of slicing the core stage open from top to bottom, and you're dispersing that energy out so that it can't be focused in one small area. And so, that's basically what the system does. Is it's basically going to blow the rocket up and disperse that energy over an unpopulated area.
There we go. Thank you. Let's see here. Another question from Toaster Chip, who asks, "Why is there no static fire for the SLS mission?" Technically, there was. It was just a long time ago because they did a green run of the core stage out at the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi, and that is effectively a full mission duration static fire, right?
That's right.
And also, while these particular boosters have not been fired together, they have done test of the design of the SRB out in Utah. So they've test fired, other boosters to test the design. That's been verified. Obviously, you can't static fire an SRB before it flies because you use up all the fuel and have to recast the thing. But the core stage
Nope.
has been static fired. Oh,
There's a way they actually understand the exact energy that's in those boosters without static firing them, and this
and
is
how's
cool.
that?
So you sort of do a cheat static fire on solid rocket boosters. So you make all your propellant, you put it all in the casings, but then you save a little bit of that propellant and you burn that propellant that you've saved to understand the true energy characteristic of
Okay.
what's in the boosters. So you cheat the static fire on solid rockets in that regard. So these have not been static fired, but they saved portions of the propellant and then burned them all together to understand how they're actually going to burn tomorrow morning.
And this is why we have Philip and Chris here, so that I can't say stupid things and they can correct me. So thank you.
Oh, to be fair, I only learned that last year from Northrop Grumman. Then thank you to Northrop Grumman for that answer, because I was just as amazed as you when they were like, "Oh no, we can static fire them," and I was like, "Explain."
Yeah, very cool. On the same front, we have another question from B Flying, who says, "Why can't the SRBs use Virgin Galactic's abort system?" And this is a great question, but there's a difference. The Virgin Galactic, so we're talking about the propulsion system on Spaceship Two. NASA Spaceflight has actually broadcast an aborted flight attempt on that motor. The difference is that is a hybrid motor. So yes, the fuel is solid, just like the solid rocket boosters here, but the oxidizer is not pre-mixed in. It is a liquid oxidizer. So if you stop flowing the liquid oxidizer, it wasn't liquid oxygen, it was nitrous oxide or something like that. It was a different liquid that had oxygen in it. But if you stop flowing that through the motor, obviously it shuts down the engine because you only have fuel, you have nothing to combust it with. The solid rocket boosters on SLS are pre-mixed fuel and oxidizer that you just need to ignite. And so that you can't shut down because once the combustion starts, you have no way to stop the flow of oxygen into the booster, basically.
Bingo.
So thank you for that question there. More coming in here. First of all, Didicate says thank you for the PadRat membership. Also, Junar has gifted a Red Team membership, so appreciate that. And Meaningless has upgraded their membership to the Flight Engineer level. That is very generous support, so we appreciate that.
Thank you. That really means a lot to us. Thank you.
Polish says, "Boys and girls of NASA Spaceflight, the water tank at 39B looks like a Lego minifigure's head. I can't disagree with you." Thank you for the support there.
Oh my gosh,
Norway.
I can't.
Appreciate that.
I now can't not see that.
Right, you can't unsee it now. Exactly. Let's see here. Here's a quick question from Cage. Obviously hoping for a successful mission, but if the decision should come up, do they have options to alter the plans for Artemis 2 if Artemis 1 has some sort of significant failure?
Oh yes, yeah. If there were to be some significant thing where Orion could not complete the biggest thing that they need to do, which is the heat shield test. Let's be very clear about this. The heat shield test coming back in at lunar return velocity is the biggest thing they need to do, because they changed the design of the heat shield between the engineering flight test that took place in December of 2014 with Orion and the Orions that will now do the crewed mission. So that part of the test is from the Orion perspective the biggest element of putting crew on that for Artemis 2. Now, how to answer this without having this answer be an hour long is kind of like, if SLS were to not get Orion and the ICPS into the desired orbit, which is 30 kilometers by 1,805 is the drop-off orbit for the core stage that leaves the ICPS and Orion in. So if they can get to that with the core stage, you can do your mission, right? if you lose an RS-25 engine right at solid rocket booster ignition, right when you are coming off the pad, the core stage cannot at that point get you into that orbit. You would have to ignite the ICPS to get you into an orbit. Once you do that, you've pretty much eliminated going to the moon with a translunar injection burn because there's not enough propellant left on the ICPS. So that's an issue. But once you get to about the 3-minute 30-second mark into the flight, you can lose one RS-25 engine. The core stage can still get you to that orbit, and the ICPS can then still do your thing. Before that, you would basically be in a position of where in the flight the engine failed and where can the core stage leave you off? What does the ICPS have to do? You could probably do a repeat of engineering flight test 1 and just use the ICPS to shoot Orion up into a highly elliptical orbit, fire the engine again at apogee to increase your velocity back down and basically cheat the reentry velocity from lunar distance in that regard. But you would not get the 42-day stress test on Orion. You would have had a major failure you would have had a major issue with your launch vehicle. So what does that mean to Artemis 2? It all sort of depends on what the failure is, where in the flight it happens, and what mission objectives you can still accomplish in that regard. So it's a really good question. It's really complicated to answer. I hope I did a good job from the launch vehicle side of starting down that path, but it is a really long, complicated answer to how a failure on Artemis 1 would affect Artemis 2. Obviously, if the rocket were to have to be destroyed or has a major failure or has a catastrophic failure like that, Artemis 2 would not do what it's supposed to do because the rocket failed. And a huge part of this is proving that SLS can carry humans and getting that data. So complicated answer, but it really depends on what the failure is and where in the flight it is.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that, Chris. Another question here, Richard asking, what are the black markings on the side boosters? I'll actually add, it's not just on the side boosters, it's on the core stage and the ICPS and I think even Orion a little bit. But those are those optical markers, right?
Oh, it could be. Does he mean
unless they're talking
the
about the
black
other black
bands that
markings.
go around? Yeah. So there are 2 black markings on the solid rockets. Thomas, you're correct that like the checkerboard ones are for tracking, and it's called photogrammetry, basically making sure that the boosters are moving the way the computer models said they would, both off the pad and as they separate. The black bands that go around the solid rocket boosters as you go down. So there are corresponding white bands in them. If you look at the casing segments, there are white bands and black bands. The black bands are the factory seal joints, and the white seals are this is where we put the 2 solid rocket motor segments together in the VAB and then sealed them after stacking.
There you go. All right, I'm going to try and speed run some more questions. We are coming near the end of the show, but we're going to go a little long because I know we had a bit of a late start too. And we got a couple more questions we can wrap up here. Don says, given that ICPS dates from Delta 3, by Boeing logic, should this be named Delta 5? No, we're not doing the Delta V thing. But we appreciate the support there, Don. Here's a question about the SRB fuels that we touched on earlier. Ralph saying, I've seen 2 different answers from NASA. Is powdered aluminum the fuel in the SRBs because P-band is the binder? I believe that's correct. The fuel in the fuel oxidizer mix has powdered aluminum as a fuel, and then the nitrous oxide is a oxidizer. Do I have that right?
Yes, in general, yes. Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah, for these, yeah.
So yeah, Ralph, I believe you're right there. Glad we could clarify that, and thank you for the question and the support. Douglas Richardson with the upgrade to the Capcom membership. So Douglas, thank you for your support there. Nick becoming a flight engineer member as well. Thank you so much. Jerwa gifting 5 red team memberships. That's a lot of very generous support. So everyone, thank you for your support. Again, this all goes towards improving the Artemis 1 coverage. We've invested a lot into Artemis 1. If you're paying attention to the camera views, you might have already caught a glimpse of some of this. So thank you for everyone for where we support, and we're glad to be offering this in-depth coverage, and we're continuing to improve as well. Here's an interesting question. Chris, I'm going to go to you on this. Robert says, doesn't SLS owe some of its inspiration to the direct Jupiter concepts which were developed in part on the NSF forums?
Oh, I don't think we developed that in our entirety. No, no, no. Jupiter and Jupiter C. These were some sort of. There's yeah. In general, SLS is sort of the version of the shuttle-derived launch vehicle that made it to fruition. There were so many of these plans, including Shuttle C as a cargo-only variant, the Jupiter versions of these, which would have had like 2 external tanks and 4 solid rocket boosters in one configuration. Yeah, there were a lot of different ideas. The Jupiter class rockets were one of them for shuttle derived technology. Then the Ares program came, or the Ares rockets came after that, and now we have SLS. So it's all sort of there, and it's all sort of there in the history as you go back. But was SLS a direct like let's take Jupiter? No, it wasn't that. But I can't say that it doesn't have that element in it because it is a shuttle-derived vehicle like Jupiter C would have been.
Right.
Yeah,
And
I don't
adding
know
here. Oh, go ahead, Philip.
I was just going to say, I don't know that the direct team would be satisfied with the way that SLS went in terms of how it was executed. So I don't know that they really want to take a lot of credit for it. I think what they were proposing was something they wanted to deliver on something a lot faster than this, and that was more not just deriving from the design, but leveraging the shuttle infrastructure that existed at the time that the program was ended. And so, one of the things that has happened with SLS is that they've obviously optimized for performance, but that also means that they've and also some new technology. It's almost everything besides the engines and the boosters is new. It's all new infrastructure. That's obviously very expensive. It takes time to implement and so on. So,
And
I would be curious if the direct team really would be would consider it flattering to say that SLS is a derivative of them.
But I actually need to back up and correct something because and my apology, I did not remember this correctly. No, there was direct involvement from NSF on the Jupiter Direct and stuff like that. So I am sorry for misspeaking, but yes, designed with feedback from the NSF forum. So yes, there was involvement from us. I am sorry that I misspoke on that. Yes.
There we go. Yeah, there's definitely there's some weird things. If you go back to the NSF forums, there's been some pretty cool involvement between the direct development. I remember that one time a bunch of forum members like repaired the landing video from an early Falcon 9 experimental landing and stuff like that. It's super cool
Yes.
stuff. And the forums is such an awesome place.
Yeah, that's true. One of the early Falcon 9 landing videos out in the Atlantic was so corrupted, they put out a call like, can anyone help with this? And we did it. Yep.
Yep. All right, we got another question here. Carl is saying, when can we expect the first parts of Artemis 2 in the vehicle assembly building? Thanks from Sweden. Philip, maybe this is a question for you?
Maybe March, maybe April of next year if they decide to ship the core stage that early. But in terms of stacking the vehicle, it might be another year or longer before we start actually putting it together. So generally speaking, you don't want to put stuff in the VAB until you're ready to put it together. But we may see something stored in the VAB next year.
Now that's interesting. You mentioned the core stage. Don't the boosters have to arrive first? Or I know they have to be stacked first, but are we expecting the core stage to arrive first?
If they shipped it when it's supposed to be ready, which is around St. Patrick's Day next year, I think that would not expect them to certainly need to ship the boosters that early. And so that's why I was asking when I was at Michoud last month, if you guys really finish this in mid-March next year, are you really going to ship it to Florida right away? Because Orion is very unlikely. The second Orion, even if fingers crossed everything goes smoothly on this mission and they hit all their test objectives, but they have a lot of work to go from Artemis 1 to Artemis 2, not just Orion, but SLS, and the mobile launcher is going to have some modifications that need to be done. So they won't need to be stacking the vehicle. We talked about the boosters being stacked for a long time. I think they probably want to avoid stacking them too early this time.
All right, sounds good. Folks, we are coming up on the end of our NSF Live show for Artemis 1 launch day -1. Really quick, we did mention a really cool photo from Brady, so I'm going to plug this hard. That lightning photo with SLS in the back there as well is now available on the NASASpaceflight.com shop, which is where all bunch of merch is available and is a great way to support the NASA Spaceflight team. Let's see, we gotta get that lightning.
That picture just has like all the energy. Like, yeah, that picture is just so wonderful to me because it's like that nature versus rocket part that is a huge part of all U.S. launch sites. That was really good shot from Brady there.
Yeah, that is a brand new metal print there, and of course the metal prints have been really popular, so go ahead and check that out. Also, we've got a bunch of new shirts and things like that, and if you want that mock diamond shirt, I'm going to try and illustrate that. I'm trying to get to a specific plug based on a specific camera view, based on if someone can get in front of a camera in time. I'm going to try stalling as long as I can. But I believe we do have someone modeling the mock diamonds.
Yeah, Jack's right in front of the clock. Yep, yeah.
There's Jack.
There is Jack Beyer with the mock diamonds merch, standing by the countdown clock at the press site, there to cover Artemis 1, of course. Thank you, Jack, for modeling. Awesome. Yeah, so the NASASpaceflight.com store, also obviously a great way to support what we do here at NASA Spaceflight. Also, just a big thank you to all of the super chats and the memberships as well. Of course, we do want to give a thank you to the members who go above and beyond with the flight engineer and launch director members of memberships. Jack, thank you so much. So thank you to all of those members who send their support our way. All right, before we wrap up here, I believe it is time to preview our launch day coverage. So here is the plan, everyone. First of all, there is our membership. Thank you. We want to get those names up there. So thank you for all of those memberships. I'm going to hit a button right now, which is going to publish a new article on board NASASpaceflight.com. The launch preview article is officially live. I literally just published it. So if you go to NASASpaceflight.com, that will give you a written rundown of the launch, the final bit of the countdown, as well as the ascent from Launch Complex 39B. If you want to see all that happen live, embedded in that launch article, and we'll make it public right after this, is the launch broadcast, which was planned to begin at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. That is 03:30 UTC. And that will be right before the teams at the Launch Control Center go through their go, no-go for propellant loading operations. So we will be going live later tonight, and that coverage will be nonstop all the way from that go, no-go until launch on Monday morning. Again, the launch window opens at 8:33 a.m. Eastern Time, 12:33 UTC. The NASA Spaceflight team will be supporting from the press site at the Kennedy Space Center, as well as our home studios. We will have the team out in force, and we can assure you we'll be answering as many questions as you can. So if we didn't get to your question today, bring it to the launch live stream. We're going to be answering more of them there. And of course, we'll be bringing you live updates on the progress of fueling and of the launch itself. Folks, we're looking forward to seeing you there. We are all very excited for this launch. Chris, looking forward to launch coverage in a few hours.
Oh my God, the Artemis generation begins in 16 hours with SLS's opening of the launch window. What a time. We are going back to the moon, this time to stay. If that doesn't make you happy, I don't know what will. That is, my gosh, we can say this in our lifetimes, and here we go with the start of our permanent presence on the moon. This is the first mission that starts that sequence, so huge smile, and can't wait to cover it with one of the best teams, the best team in the world.
Thank you, Chris. Looking forward to joining you out at the press site here in a few hours. I also want to give a shout out to Mr. Philip Sloss, who will, of course, be on our launch commentary as well. Philip, thank you for joining us for NSF Live. Maybe you can get a nap in before launch coverage starts, because I know we're going to be pretty busy. Thank you for hopping on and for your expertise as always.
Yeah, I was just looking. That's less than 7 hours from now, I believe. So yeah, I was thinking a nap might be a good idea for an old guy like me.
Philip, we appreciate you as always. Also, a shout out to Patrick in the back room operating today's stream. He'll be supporting our coverage as well. So, Patrick, thanks for that. And folks, hope you all will join in for the NASA Spaceflight Live coverage of Artemis 1.
And a major shout out to Doss and Michael, who have spent a lot of time making sure that this is going to work for us tomorrow. Like, major shout out to them on our team too.
Yeah, awesome. We will have the entire team out in force, so we will be bringing them all in, and we'll definitely a big thank you to everyone who's involved. We'll reiterate that, of course, on the launch coverage as well. But folks, my name is Thomas Burkhart, News Director for NASA Spaceflight. The next time you see us live will be live launch coverage for the launch of Artemis 1. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you'll come back in a few hours, and we will see you there. Thanks, everybody.
We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
RTP chamber pressure looks good. Doubling up. Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight outside SCE off. Say again, SCE off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.